Welcome back to another episode of the Political Lens Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Mexico drug cartel and the killing of El Mencho, the head big drug lord in Mexico. So without further ado, we're going to get right into this. In February 2026, Mexico experienced one of the most significant security events in the modern history with the death of the world's most powerful drug traffickers. The killing of a dominant cartel leader triggered immediate waves of violence, raised urgent questions about regional stability, and sparked debate over whether the United States could face retaliation. This report examines how the operation unfolded, the chaos that followed across Mexico, and the potential risks to the United States, and what strategic response may look like moving forward. On the 22nd of February 2026, Mexican federal forces carried out a coordinated military operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco, targeting Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes, widely known as El Mencho, the longtime leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or the CJNG, which the operation involved elite Mexican military units who engaged a cartel gunman in a firefight at a secure compound, and although the authorities initially intended to capture him alive, El Mencho was fatally wounded during the confrontation and later died. While also being transported for medical care, the U.S. intelligence agencies reported assisted with the surveillance and intelligence sharing, but the tactical operation itself was executed by Mexican forces on Mexican soil. The immediate aftermath was swift and violent, and the CJNG cells launched coordinated retaliation across multiple regions of Mexico. Within hours, armed groups established burning roadblocks, torched vehicles, and attacked security personnel, and disrupted transportation corridors in numerous states, creating widespread fear and paralysis in affected communities. Major cities in western Mexico experienced lockdown-like conditions as schools closed, flights were delayed, and the residents sheltered indoors. Amid gunfire and uncertainty, Mexican authorities reported significant casualties among the security forces and cartel gunmen, along with numerous arrests tied to the retaliatory violence. The scale and speed of the response demonstrated that the CJNG, despite losing its top leader, maintained an organized and disciplined command structure capable of mobilizing armed cells quickly. Rather than collapsing immediately, the cartel showed that its operational depth extended far beyond a single individual. The death of El Mencho created a power vacuum within the CJNG, raising the likelihood of internal fragmentation and territorial disputes. History shows that the cartel decapitation strategies often weaken centralized control but can trigger short-term spikes in violence as lieutenants and rival factions compete for dominance. Without a clearly unified successor, the CJNC splintering into competing groups and potentially prolonging the instability in the states in Mexico, such as Jalisco, Michoacan, Guanajuato, and Colima. Excuse me for these words. Rival organizations, particularly the Sinaloa cartel, may attempt to exploit the situation by expanding into former CJNG strongholds, such as the territorial encroachment, which could ignite new inter-cartel conflicts that reshape Mexico's criminal landscape, rather than end the cartel's dominance altogether. For civilians, this kind of transition period can mean increased violence, extortion, kidnappings, and uncertainty as criminal groups fight for control of trafficking routes and the revenue streams. For the United States, implications are serious but complex, as the CJNC has been one of the primary organizations responsible for trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other narcotics into American communities. The cartel built transitional distribution networks that rely on partnerships with the United States-based criminal groups, meaning its economic lifeline is deeply tied to American drug demand. Any instability with the CJNG could temporarily disrupt supply chains, shift trafficking routes, or create internal competition among distributors operating inside the United States. Let me say that again, distributors. However, the experts generally assess that the large-scale parliamentary retaliation on the U.S. soil is unlikely because the cartels typically avoid provoking overwhelming federal law enforcement or military responses that could threaten their business model. Instead, retaliation would more likely take the form of increased smuggling attempts, targeted violence against rivals or informants, cyber-enabled financial crimes, or adaptive trafficking strategies designed to preserve profits. Cartels are profit-driven enterprises that actions that jeopardize their access to the U.S. market would undermine their own financial survival. Indirect consequences for the United States could include short-term spikes in drug shipments as factions attempt to secure revenue, shifts in trafficking corridors towards different border states, or increased immigration for violence-affected areas of Mexico. A fragmented CJNC could also result in smaller decentralized trafficking cells that are more difficult for law enforcement to monitor and dismantle. These dynamics create more complex enforcement environment rather than a conventional military-style threat. From a policy standpoint, preventing escalation requires a layered strategy that combines enforcement, intelligence sharing, financial sanctions, and institutional cooperation. Strengthening intelligence integration between the U.S. and Mexican authorities is essential for tracking the emerging leaders, monitoring potential retaliation, and disrupting the supply chains before they stabilize. Financial sanctions targeting cartel assets, anti-money laundering enforcement, and efforts to curb the southbound flow of firearms can significantly weaken the cartel's capabilities without triggering a dramatic confrontation. If I was advising a future administration led by President Donald Trump, the likelihood approach would emphasize aggressive cartel designations, expanded use of financial sanctions, reinforced border infrastructure, and measurably security cooperation benchmarks with Mexico. At the same time, maintaining the diplomatic coordination would be crucial, as unilateral military actions inside Mexico could strain relations and limit the intelligence sharing that is vital to preventing the retaliation. A comprehensive approach would also need to address domestic drug demand through treatment access, overdose prevention incentives, and public health strategies that reduce the profitability of fentanyl and synthetic narcotics. And the broader strategic picture of the death of El Mencho represents a significant tactical victory, but not the end of the cartel power in Mexico or the transitional drug trade. Whether the situation stabilizes depends on how effectively Mexican authorities prevent fragmentation and contain emerging factions in the coming months. For the United States, the most realistic outlook is not an invasion-style retaliation, but continued confrontation with adaptable, profit-driven criminal networks, which require sustained, coordinated, and multi-dimensional responses. The killing of El Mencho marks a pivotal moment in an ongoing struggle against organized crime in Mexico. Yet history shows that moving a single leader rarely ends deeply with entrenched criminal enterprises. The coming months will determine whether this event weakens CJNG permanently or it simply reshapes the balance of power among the rival groups. Ultimately, lasting security for both Mexico and the United States will depend on one operation alone, but one consistent strategic cross-border cooperation, financial distribution, and a long-term effort to reduce the forces that allows cartels to thrive. Thanks for watching the Political Lens Podcast. We will see you in the next episode, and make sure you like, share, and subscribe because it helps the channel out. I really appreciate it, and thanks again. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.